Welcome everyone to Unsafe Space Book Club. Today we're doing Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. And let me see if I can unmute everyone and make this work. So here we go. I think everyone can unmute themselves at this point. Carrie, are you there? Can you unmute yourself? There's Thomas.
Hi, Thomas. Hi, Carter.
There's Carrie. All right. So we're here.
Oh, I see a lot of people we've had before. Cheeky Mare, Tamara, Manny, appropriate name, Allison. Oh, Nick Hemingway is here. I got to meet Nick in person. Lindsay's here. I got to meet Lindsay in person.
Oh, cool.
Harry,
I see a lot of people
Matt,
that are new to book
Deb.
club also,
There's a lot of
though.
new people. Alex,
Yeah.
Sagita, and Keith the Hat Guy. Is that everyone? Ben, Harry? Okay.
Yeah.
This is a big group.
I count 17 right now. Actually, plus Zach is coming in a moment. So
this is the largest Hollywood Squares we're ever going to play.
that's right. So let's jump in with Carrie. Did you read it?
I did. Hey, let's just say first impressions. I really enjoyed this. The language wasn't that hard to get. You know, he just drops a lot of the articles, right?
Yeah, articles, yeah.
And I also understood almost immediately why this is one of your favorite books. And it even references some of your other favorite books.
I didn't even realize that until I reread it, because it's been like probably 20 years since I read this book. But yeah, I was reading it going, oh yeah, no wonder I like this book. I forgot. It's a fun, easy read, I think.
It's fun. You find yourself, I think, pretty quickly coming to identify with a computer and humanizing a computer and appreciating his sense of humor. But yeah, I enjoyed it. What are other first impressions of this one? Who wants to go?
I'll go. I enjoyed it. This is about like my ninth time through the book. So I discovered Heinlein in grade school, and I have been reading them ever since. But I think if you look at the book in the context of the time it was written, which is in the early 60s, right after the moon landing, you got to take and admire his predictive ability as far as how people will go. I don't think he ever anticipated it would shut down the space program.
No. In fact, someone asked by email if the fact that the predictions were not accurate, like some of them just weren't accurate, a lot of them weren't accurate, does it make it harder to read? And I was thinking, because my daughter's in the middle of reading I, Robot, and she read 2001 recently, and I just read this. I can't think of a science fiction book that actually has had accurate predictions. So for me, it doesn't bother me at all. I'm just like, oh yeah, well, this is where they thought they would be. Like, we're not there. They missed things like the internet and thought would be living in tunnels on the moon. Like, it doesn't bother me. Does it bother anyone else? Does it make it hard to read?
Well, not me, but it certainly takes and brings to mind the meme from Back to the Future. Where is my flying car by now?
Yes. Yeah.
It reminds me of 1984 in that even though the predictions aren't the same in an exact the same fashion, the manner in which human nature is portrayed is still happening. It's just happening in slightly different ways and a different time with, some different tools. So, they're not always going to know exactly what the technology is going to bring. But I think as long as you look at human nature and it's a good predictor of it, then that's what counts. And it's funny that Carrie says she understood why you love this book, because I came out of it thinking this feels like an Ayn Rand book, except it's science fiction. and the professor is the guy who is the voice of reason within Fountainhead or within Atlas Shrugged.
It does a little bit feel like that, although I think she would push back on a lot of it. She was, I think, much stricter in her view of how things should be. One thing that struck me about the book this time that I didn't have it makes sense that I didn't see this earlier because it's a new phenomenon. I viewed the loonies as kind of Trump's base in their attitudes. Like it was they didn't have education. They're just kind of regular people doing their thing, making their lives, wanting to be left alone. And I almost felt like, oh, this is, you can almost see the intellectuals hating them and looking down on them in a very similar way as a lot of Trump's base who just wants to, work at the steel mill or drive trucks or do a lot of blue collar labor and be left alone and be relatively free.
They're the proletariat in 1984.
Yeah. Where there's not, even their language is not considered
proper
educated.
English.
It's not proper English. Yeah, exactly. Right. I thought that was interesting. Any other thoughts from people?
Any general thoughts?
One thing I want to say, it takes place in like 2076, so we can't say whether he predicted the future right yet.
Well, he does reference stuff that happens in the 90s.
Yeah, but I just thought I'd throw that out. And I see the reference like to the professor. I kind of thought of the professor as Ben Franklin. He's like the old guy in the Revolution.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
He certainly mentions, he certainly references early American history and the founding fathers and obviously Thomas Jefferson and stuff a lot. So that makes sense.
So if I was going to pick somebody, I'd be to compare the professor to, it'd be Thomas Jefferson, because obviously he admired Thomas Jefferson so much. And I think the one line that comes to mind is when he says that Thomas Jefferson almost slipped over as non-government, but he got caught at it.
Yes. Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. I saw aspects of it. I kind of picked Ben Franklin because, Ben Franklin in 76 was really old. Like when they wrote the Constitution, he had to be helped into the chambers. So he used that aspect. He threw in a bunch of dates and I looked up some. I was just curious. Like he throws out, May 13th, 2075. Like that's when it starts, and it starts with a tax, right? They put a tax on food. I think he's talking about like the Stamp Act, or something. He's and he's using, and I looked up several of them. Like he has July 4th, 2076 in there as an important date that they celebrate.
Yep. Yeah. And actually he did the same thing that we did with the Declaration of Independence, where it happened on the 2nd, but we celebrated on the 4th. He mirrored that exact timeline on the moon, right? It happened on the 2nd, but it wouldn't be ratified or whatever till the 4th.
And for the same reason, because there was a relationship between the French Independence Day and we did it. So it was a diplomatic thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the July 4th is the day that the 100 broadsides were printed, right? July 2nd is actually the Independence Day.
Right. Something else I noticed, by the way, which again I didn't notice last time, but struck me, so I'm gonna read it. I mean, he wrote this book in 1966, and I'm just gonna read this because I was fascinated because I don't think anyone really predicted this in 1966. He's talking about he's talking about North America here, so we can assume the U.S., right? He says, is mixed up place another way. They care about skin color by making point of how they don't care. First trip I was always too light or dark and somehow blamed either way, or was always being expected to take stand on things I have no opinions on. Bog knows I don't know what genes I have. So there was this prediction that, we're going to be in this society where they assume that your skin color is correlated to your opinion somehow, and it's very important, and they pretend not to care by caring a lot about what your skin color is. I don't think that was obvious in 1966. Does anyone else?
It made me feel like myself being mixed. That whatever. I don't know what my genes are. Well, I just got
Right.
something to say. Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other? I know there were a couple people who started talk a second ago with their general takeaway or their general opinion on the book.
Well,
This was
the dialect. Go ahead.
This was my first Heinlein. I love sci-fi, and he's always been on my to be read list, and I read this at the same time as The Cold Millions, which just came out, and they're both sort of about like the workers rising up and everything. And I gotta say, I read a lot of contemporary new novels, and this was so much better. They're talking about The Cold Millions, and they do this every year about 50 books. They're like, this is the best book ever, and I'm like, no, it's not. And you go back to something like one of these big names like Heinlein, and you see that no, there's so much. He's doing so much thematically. He's doing so much in the genre, and he's doing so much with the language. And he's so many of his scenes perform multiple functions as well. And it's this is so much better than so many things that I've read and recently. And I just loved it because it's, refreshing to see actual good writing for compared to what's going on now.
Why do we think that is? I've noticed that with books outside of science fiction, and I don't read science fiction much, so I don't have your experience, Alex, but I wonder why that is, that we see such a difference with writing today comparatively. I just read Frederick Douglass's, I forget what it's called, his narrative, and I'm thinking this guy grew up in slavery. He had to escape, didn't get out till the second time, was beat, learned to write using chalk. His words are like poetry. And I'm thinking, how is it that someone so long ago with that background can write like that? And today, to Alex's point, a lot of the stuff we're reading is so boring in its artistry. And, I didn't know that it transferred to other genres, but I think that's really interesting. And it makes me think what it is that we're doing that has affected writing this way.
One theory is Frederick Douglass didn't go to government schools. Maybe that's where they.
There you go.
I actually went to school for creative writing, fiction, and I can tell you they push theme over anything else. So, which always bothered me because I was like, that's only one thing. And most people, I can tell when they're writing today, they're writing to get into the classroom, into the academic realm, that people will talk about the themes of their books instead of the artistry of what they're writing. So to me, I find that genre writing today is actually better than most literature because of the fact that they're not just doing, they might do theme or they might not in genre, but when they do theme, they're also doing the language, they're also doing the plot, they're also doing the character development. They're trying to fire on all cylinders, and most of them, after quite a while of working on it, they can do it. And the problem is that the literature writers today are not working on those other aspects of their writing. They are only working on getting an interesting theme into the classroom. And it is incredibly frustrating because everyone talks about these award-winning books, these books that everybody thinks is so amazing, and the only thing they have for them is theme.
Yeah, I like how this book had its own language, someone mentioned the dialect. So at first that really threw me off because I thought maybe this was like a Kindle mistake or something, like something didn't get translated from print to digital because the book's so old. But then I'm like, oh, this is very similar to The Expanse, where there's the Belters in their culture. And so you can see how this book has really inspired that series. But I think it's just so well fleshed out as a story world. Like there is this entire culture that's built up. You know, they call themselves loonies, and they have this like total mishmash of languages. And my wife grew up in Hawaii, and so they speak Pidgin. It's like this mishmash of languages, and whenever we go back there, she'll put on her Pidgin accent and all the vocabulary, and I'm like, this is like a totally other language. She's like, well, this is what everyone speaks, because it really is like a true melting pot in Hawaii. And so, you know, he doesn't go into a ton of detail about like the environment, like this isn't like a Kim Stanley Robinson kind of book with just tons of scientific detail, but it's so rich in cultural detail. Like you feel like you're there and you know these people. And so I can't believe this book was written in 66. I mean, Carter, I heard about this book in 1996. My friend in high school was telling me about it. So it's just amazing that it's really stood the test of time.
Can I jump in, Zach? I wanted to say, to your point, you just made me think of one of my favorite lines in the book, which is where he's talking about Mike, the computer, has read a lot of fiction, because in some ways reading fiction gives him a better sort of what you're saying, the cultural, you know, he may not have, this author may not have a lot of scientific prose or whatever, but he's rich in culture. And this line where he said, I used to question Mike's endless reading of fiction, wondering what notions he was getting, but it turned out he got a better feeling for human life from stories than he had been able to garner from facts, which is just really highlights, I think, why some of the books of fiction we've read for book club are so important, I think, for understanding human nature and these cycles that we seem to repeat in history. And I like that he included that the computer's like, oh, I need to read fiction.
Could I jump in? It's worth noting that in 1966, sci-fi was not a literary form at all. It was suitable for small boys, really. And so, you know, this many years later, 50 odd years later, to be kind of being able to hit all of those thematic and narrative elements that we find so important today, and still standing the test of time, that's pretty good. And whilst you were saying that he doesn't have the same level of detail as Kim Stanley Robinson, he is one of the fathers of hard sci-fi. He may have got the phones wrong, they still have wires, but you know, he got so many other things so right. I mean, his minimal approach to orbital mechanics and whatever is just spot on.
So something that's really amazing to me, the way he, good grief. Am I talking? No, okay.
Yeah, I hear you. We hear you. Yeah.
So the things that really can stand the test of time is his personal interactions, his people, right? You look at the moon and you look at the way it was founded in his mechanics, and his people had to turn out the way they did. But for all his understanding of people, you know, Heinlein was an engineer. So I mean, you don't expect that out of engineers. But
he really got people.
Yeah. And then so some of the things that are applicable today, that's amazing. I mean, there's a line in there about how if you're going to have a revolution, you got to be able to control the press. You got to have the communications.
Yep.
Think about what's went on in the past year, you know, in the campaign this year. And does that not just take and show how on the button he was about that?
Yeah, totally. There's also a point where he talks about maybe I can find it actually, where they talk about censorship and it's the prof, and he says limiting the freedom of news just a little bit is in the same category with the classic examples a little bit pregnant. Like he basically was saying, like, we can't have just a little bit of censorship. Like that's not how it works. You have to not have any. And I find it fascinating that if you think about what allowed them to succeed, it wasn't actually a revolution in philosophy. It wasn't a revolution in technology. It wasn't that suddenly the masses kind of organically swelled up and, the culture went a certain direction. It was that they controlled communications. That's what it was. It was they could communicate to one another and they could manipulate via propaganda society. And I think that is super relevant to what's happening today.
Yeah, I found that part really concerning, like the whole time.
Oh, absolutely.
And like when the computer's controlling transmissions to Earth, and then they're getting filtered news, I was like, I don't know, it scared me, quote unquote, because it was so close to what's going on right now.
Yeah, and there's like a moral question, right? Because definitely the prof does things and supports things that he believes are immoral, but he's kind of doing this calculation of like, well, we're going to run out of food and everyone's going to die in 7 years, or I rob some money and start a revolution. like he does things that I don't think he believes are necessarily moral, but he does them because he feels like he's between a rock and a hard place, and he does what's necessary.
That reminds me of you.
Yeah, a little bit, right? Because I think the other thing I like about the prof is, even though he mentions early on that he's actually kind of an anarchist, or someone mentions that he's an anarchist, he's really more concerned about the direction rather than the goal. Like, this is the direction that we need to go, and like he recognizes he's not going to have the utopia he imagines right away. He's just trying to push people in the right direction and get over this hurdle of being out from, being under the thumb of the authority. And so, okay, he's done that. He's trying to help him set up some sort of structure that's as free as he possibly can be, and he's done his job. But yeah, I like that they made him have to get his hands dirty. I like that Heinlein made him not have to get his hands dirty a little bit, and like, look, I'm making hard choices. Like I'm either, we're fighting someone who's violating a lot of moral laws. I'm gonna do this thing that I don't think is right because there's some, I hate to use the term greater good, but he's got some other purpose that he thinks is more wrong. If he doesn't do it, there'll be more bad things will happen. I'm not sure how I think about that, but I like that it's in the book because I like that it's messy and it kind of makes you think.
I thought of that as like the authorities, the earthers, whatever they call them, are initiating force against the loonies. So he's under this dilemma, like, well, he's going to have to violate what he'd normally be, but it was initiated on him. So I like that.
Yeah.
I like the prediction future. I kind of use things that you've said, Carter, about that, moving towards anarchy. You're okay with libertarian, you're okay with, because you're moving in the right direction. And that's kind of like I with the professor. So maybe we should give him kudos for predicting the future. He predicted Carter.
He predicted deep fakes, having the AI creating the voice and the face, and then the personality, and imitating the director / Mort the Wart, showing him eventually looking more senile and stuff, so that if they eventually show up with a guy in a coma, they're not surprised because it looks like he's had strokes or something. Having nannies imitated to the point that he's talking to his co-husband who's working on the secret launcher, and the second husband doesn't know that he's talking to a fake.
He predicted the whole AI thing. And remember what computers were doing in 1966. Like this is about when Apollo 8 went to the moon, right? Like the computer, and I'm an engineer, so I really like Heinlein. And I read all his books when I was a kid.
That was page one, man. I mean, page one, he predicts the singularity, the presence of computer intelligence. I mean, back in the day, that's a strong prediction.
I mean, the best computers, like an example, the navigation computer on an Apollo capsule is less powerful than a key fob in your car now and has less memory. Like that's what computers are doing. And he thought of this, which is like AI past where we are now. I thought that was really precedent.
Yeah, you can tell how far back it was just by even the parts that he failed to predict, like he still imagines computers to be these giant things, and but he predicts very well what they'll be able to do. Yeah, I like that about him as well.
So
I'm sorry.
Please.
Oh, I had no idea what this book was about at all. So just went in blind completely. And I was sort of hoping it wouldn't happen, but I was waiting for the computer to turn on the loonies and somehow betray them.
Yes.
And I really loved, in a sad way, I loved the ending, when the computer was silent and there was nothing coming out of it. It was alive, but it just went inside its own shell. And it was kind of sad, but maybe that was the moment when it really became conscious, of sacrifice and hurt or whatever it was that happened, during the hardest hit to the computer itself. It made me think about a lot of things, what was human about it and why it finally went silent. That really left me thinking. I don't know what anybody else thinks about it, but I really noticed that part.
Spoiler alert,
right.
Gita, in The Cat That Walks Through Walls, another Heinlein book, they rescue Mike.
Oh, okay. I got to read that thing because I actually emailed Carter separately telling him, you know what, I really hope this computer doesn't in the end turn against these people, because there's a program already in it by its creators to find people like this and string them along and then expose them. That's what I kept thinking was going to happen. And to your point about the ending, I was disappointed, and maybe I need to reread it because I don't understand what happened to Mike, and it almost felt to me
that's
like
what's beautiful about it. It's human nature. We don't fully understand what happens to us. Maybe that's the really human side of it. That's just my thought.
Yeah, I don't mind not understanding, but I felt like I didn't have a hint to where at the end of the book it was like, oh, you know what, Mike's gone, he's kind of quiet, we're not sure why. Anyways, have a nice life. I was like, wait.
I felt the exact same way. Exactly the same. I was like, I never once thought he was going to turn on them. I didn't get that sense at all. I mean, I know that's like how, whatever, right. But I didn't pick anything up like that. But I was like, why? I have absolutely no clue as to why. And it's such a relief to me to hear that in another story, Mike comes back, because I loved him.
I took from it that
he sequel.
Well, the way Manny talked about him towards the end, I think it was talking through the computer. Like he understood the computer, and maybe not knowing exactly the reason why it went silent, but sort of understanding why it might have. It was, Manny kind of let us know, maybe gave us some hints, but I was glad that it didn't turn, because that would have been predictable, and I don't like that about books, and the predictable parts. And Alex, if I can jump in just to something you said about the literature written today, the focusing on the themes, I think it's even worse than that. A lot of writers just focus on the plot. Do I have a good plot? If I have a good plot, okay, that's it. That's all I need. And the more classic writers, they really understood the beauty of language and crafting a story just with words. And, those layers are missing from me in a lot of current literature. But I just want to piggyback on what you were saying.
I took from it that. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say.
I wanted. We've got how about Lindsay and then Manny?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts, but I wrote this down because I wanted to come back to Alex again. The thing you said about themes, the question that came in my mind was, who reads books for themes? Nobody. So and you want the characters, and I started to think that is exactly what you're seeing is themes. And the reality is the themes are uncovered or discovered as you read, as you get to know the characters. But that tied into the discussion about Mike at the end. For me, everyone has been talking about, I also thought that he was going to turn on them, but for a little bit of a different reason. The irony is that my thought of the overall theme of this is that, I wrote it down, no matter what system the people create or follow, like that's put in place to protect them from the system will always become tyrannical. Like that was my personal thought. So I actually thought that Mike being a system, because there's some comparison between Mike, there's a lot of, let me see, there's connection between like computer logic and revolution cells, which I thought was really interesting. So I was thinking Mike's going to get new information based on his computer logic, and then he'll revolt against the new system. So that was what
I took from it that Mike was the only real victim in the story. He was damaged in the worst part of the conflict, and some of his logic, or some of what made him unique, was damaged and destroyed. And as a narrative function, everyone else, pretty much all of the main characters, they all come through it pretty well. No one dies. There must be a sacrifice in every story. That's what I took from it.
I thought that that the author Heinlein, he was so visionary, like I think a lot of you have said, because this book was written in 1966, and he brings in AI. He talks about how he envisions the family relationships, and like they have this like polyamorous or polygamy, I don't know, the line marriages. And the language itself, I mean, he creates a world that he really thought about, because he was really trying to portray that picture. That's why the language, in my opinion, it's so a little bit different than what we are used to, because he was imagining what language would be like in the moon if there was a colony there for, I don't know, 200 years or whatever, not 200 years, 75 years or whatever, and how it's like a mixture of people from many different places, and then they create their own language. Also, the other thing that was very interesting was the sort of a parallel, I guess, and somebody talked about it before, how it's almost like the moon was the new world. Like when America was founded, these people came over, they created their world, and then they were under the oppression, or under the British Empire. The British monarchy was controlling everything and taking resources away. Everybody was from Europe though. But anyways, now you get to a point where the people in the moon, hey, we want to be free too. And so that's what happens, right? And it's almost like, if you think about it, looking back in the world, probably it's the story that always repeats. At some point, if you're left to be in your own little world, where somebody is telling you what and how you have to operate, you're going to get to the point where you want to be able to decide for yourself.
And I think I relate that to how farmers are treated today in America. Our rural communities are not well represented in our government, and they're overtaxed basically from their property taxes. So like that's what I kept thinking about, is like, that is happening. Someone's telling them miles away how to live their lives, how to function. And they're like, you don't even know what my problems are. And so it's like, is it always going to be the farmers? That's my question.
You mean who rise up?
Or who are being told how to live their lives without any like context.
Somebody's deciding for you, and you don't have any self-control over that.
Well, people who live in reality.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it is always the people who work with physical reality.
Yep.
And I think that's only because the authoritarians, the busybodies, become manipulators of language. And so they're the ones who manipulate people. And so the what you need to survive is actually manipulation of nature. And so though the leech class, and leech is a bad word because obviously sometimes there's good stuff, people who manipulate language, they write great books and that kind of stuff. But the people who make it their job to manipulate other people through language, of course they're going to exploit the people that actually produce things, because those are the actual productive people. Those are the people that they actually need. Manipulating other people who just speak doesn't help you. You've got to manipulate people who give you things like food and other natural resources, right? Or build things or whatever it is.
So one of the themes that went through the early stages of the book was the difficulty they were having in getting the loonies pissed off enough, because they were all very busy just trying to make a living and survive, Yeah,
so, that resonated with today. That resonated with how I feel about most of America, right? Which is like, why aren't you angry enough? And they're like, well, we have Netflix and things aren't, it's not that bad.
That's why they had to create, they called it a Pearl Harbor event, right? And the professor says, well, we need to encourage them or goad them into doing something that everyone will get pissed and then they'll fight.
Yeah, I think that works on both sides, because even though on Carter, I'll say our side, it's frustrating that people aren't frustrated, but I also hope that people are on the other side aren't frustrated enough to riot and do all the other kind of stuff that some people are doing, because it's kind of like, well, you know what? Yeah, here's your revolutionary fist, but I too like Netflix, just like the other people on the other side. So life in America is objectively pretty good for either side to be like, well, you know what? Let's just talk it out.
And bringing it to a head doesn't incur risks, right? In the book, they won, but at the beginning they had a 1 in 7 chance was the prediction. So I guess in 6 other books they lost, theoretically.
Notice in Heinlein's work that he does a very good explanation of his idea of the average people can self-organize and create morality. Here you've got an outpost away from Earth, mostly populated by criminals, with some people who are political exiles and undesirables, like China expanding and sending a bunch of Australians and Indians and Asians up to New Hong Kong. And you get a society that self-organizes with self-reinforcing rules because there's almost no actual law. And you've got chivalry, you've got trials, not what we would formally do, but you've got a de facto legal system, you've got marriages, you've got family, you've got business. And these are criminals and the descendants of criminals, and they create a very civil society. Self-organizing, self-reinforcing.
He has a line in another one of his novels where he says an armed society is a polite society, and although no one's on the moon, it's very easy to suddenly be short of breath. So that's how come you've got people who aren't that easily riled unless they need to be.
Yeah, he kept saying that, like, if you were a jerk, you essentially got shoved out an airlock relatively quickly. So you got to be nice. And then especially because there's only 1 in 10 people are women, you can't be a rapist or sexually assault a woman. Like, it's always her choice. And that's why the polygamy existed in the first place. And women had free reign to marry and divorce as they pleased, essentially. And that was kind of interesting to me because when they go down to earth to talk to people, they never mention that as a positive, that the women could had so much control over their lives, which I thought was kind of weird. You can decide whether or not a man touches you. That's up to you. And they never, and that's not the case on Earth. And I thought that was weird that they never brought it up. Maybe because to them it was well, duh.
And you talk about the instigating event, the revolution getting Manny arrested for polygamy by a judge who's upset by how mixed race everybody in the photo was. And for the loonies, that's an instigator of going, excuse me, nearly everybody is in a group marriage, or the most common was 2 men and 1 woman. If he's guilty of a crime, we all are. And the women were upset on that because they picked that system, or that's how it organized. And they said, now this is how all the guys get interested in politics, because the women were going, oh my God, my marriage is illegal.
Yeah, there is a lot of one. I actually appreciate that he took the time to think about what society would be and propose an alternate set of romantic and sexual mores that I think bothers a lot of people that read this book. I guess understandably, but I love that he thought about, like, okay, well, humans, I mean, there's a couple lines in about adaptation in the book, like humans adapt. If these are the circumstances, what stable things fall out of those circumstances that, like, what adaptation do humans have? And like, is that the way it would go if it was 10-1? I don't know, but it probably wouldn't be the same way it is now. And it's certainly a realistic, like, oh, I can see why if women are only 1 in 10 at the beginning, they are in way more control and have way more power. They're precious commodities. They're not as easy to find, and so people have to treat them better. So like I really appreciate that he did that, because he didn't have to do that to write he could have written a science fiction book about the moon revolting and not really thought about, okay, what do dynamics after several generations look like if there's a skew in the male-female population one direction, and if you're in an environment that's extremely dangerous, right? You have to pay for air. I'm glad he brought that up too, because it's just like, oh, you literally pay for air. It's this. There's always there really is no such thing as a free lunch. Everything is paid for. Everything is something like. I appreciate that he went to that much trouble to really flesh the world out in a very rich way, and I don't see a lot of science fiction doing that. Like Arthur C. Clarke is great. 2001 is interesting, but and does some cool AI stuff, but in no way fleshes out relationships and how society has evolved at all, really. I don't know.
I agree with that. I just want to Heinlein's, he's a hard science fiction writer, I guess, and I'm a big science fiction fan. I think I've read all Heinlein's books, but I did it in like 1970, 72, and I don't remember him. But I don't think he wanted the line marriage as a theme. Like, that wasn't a thing that he set out to do because he wanted to talk about that. It's more like he thought through what this world would be. And in that situation, it's a frontier. A lot of people are criminal. Most criminals are men. They're adventurers. They're farming and mining in a remote place. It's going to be 90% guys. Like, that is what's going to happen. And so that just fell out. It's like his catapults thing. Like, he realizes that we can't do this with rocket fuel. It just won't work. You got to use catapults. That's the only way this whole system will work. So I really like that kind of, and you see his engineer thing comes out, and I'm an engineer too. So I like that. I like Heinlein. I read all the Heinlein books, and I read all the Asimov books, and I went to David Brin. Like, that's the kind of science fiction I like. It's believable. Yeah, Arthur Clarke, 2001. I don't actually like that. And I love science fiction. It's just too close to fantasy for me.
So, hey, I like all the colloquialisms that he has. Like someone earlier said, an armed society is a polite society. He says, towards the beginning, zero pressure was placed for good manners. He just
yes.
He just thinks through all those little sayings that people have, and there's a lot of mishaps that could happen if someone wasn't nice. Well, you could arrange for a mishap to happen. And so that, again, it's just very true to how human beings are in these like very intense environments.
It felt like an evolutionary pressure for every element of the story. How many men there are to how many women, how that shakes out and how that becomes important so quickly.
I think he also, he didn't mind like sort of talking about or bringing up in some small way, like these sort of differences between, on average, like men and women. And I like that he incorporated sort of there's like a steel magnolias element going on in the beauty parlor, and gossip and stuff being used for revolutionary purposes. And there's even this part where it was Y wanted to work in the fields with the men, but they pushed her back into homemaking, not because she wasn't big and strong. She was big and strong, but because she was distracting to the male farmers. And I was like, that's kind of, and she was cool with it, right? Like, I thought it was kind of funny. Just reading some of that made me think again of how, to Alex's point about a lot of writing that's happening today. I think people are overly cognizant of these sort of social justice rules and things that you can or can't do. And I think that really dampens creativity and genius,
So Carrie, one of the things that really struck me on this read through was the contrast between the mores that were developed on the moon with the undesirables versus we have mores that are just as well enforced today, this decade, from the social justice side, right? With not fatal results, but career fatal results if you violate those. And personally, I like the set of standards that the criminals came up with.
Yeah, they're much more preferable to the civilized Earth standards. One of my other favorite parts is when the people on Earth are saying, like, well, you have to pay taxes, and he was like, he just writes down, well, what are all the things you get from taxes? And they have this whole list of all the things they get, and he's like, well, we don't get this, and we don't get this, and we don't get this, and we don't get this. He like goes down the list. He's like, well, we don't get any of that, so why should we pay anything? And we don't want any of it, really. So, I just.
I liked his idea when he said that what you want to put in your Constitution is what the government can't do, not what it is allowed to do. And, our Constitution was written by that, saying the government can't take away your right to assemble. It can't take away your right to freedom of speech. And I've heard, just in general, complaints from the left that there's too many things. There's not enough things in the Constitution saying what the government can do. And it's because they didn't want it to do a lot of things.
Wasn't that one of the arguments, though, for against the Bill of Rights, was this idea that the government is not supposed to do anything except for these few things, and everything else it's not supposed to do. And one of the arguments against including the Bill of Rights was, well, if we include these things that it can't do, people will assume that it can do other things. But it's not supposed to do other things. It's only supposed to do the things that we say it can do and nothing else. And of course, all that's been perverted, and now.
That's why they have the line, like, any of the rights not afforded here are afforded to the people in the States. They literally put that in there specifically to account for that. And the fact that that's ignored is frustrating.
That's why a lot of people say the 10th Amendment is the most important one. That's the one that says anything it's not listed is the states and the people. But yeah, Carter, the original arguments, the strongest arguments against the Bill of Rights is if they start listing rights, the number of rights are infinite. Like, you can't list them all. So it's better not to list any. I use one like the Second Amendment as an example. People talk about repealing the Second Amendment. That doesn't do anything. It doesn't matter if you repeal the Second Amendment. It's just a reminder to them. Like, there's still no right to regulate firearms granted in the Constitution.
Well, this gets back to my argument, though, that if you change the dictionary, you get anything you want. So they just interpret words in the Constitution to mean, oh, well, this grants us the power to do.
Yeah, like a judge literally said, what does keep mean about the Second Amendment? Literally asked that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, they say you can keep your Constitution. We just want your dictionary.
Right.
Something I thought was funny in here was they had the election for their Congress, and the professor's like, we just need them to exist. And the plan for him was to give them the Constitution, and this is the body that ratifies it to prove this is the collective, not just a small group of political radicals, but everybody wants the independence. And they do the election through Mike. And Manny suspects that he doubts the counts in a lot of districts. And he brings up the point of it never occurred to anybody not to trust the computer. Boy, you want to talk about relevant today?
Yeah, well, I was getting nervous the whole book because they introduced Mike as he says he's like a combination of an unsophisticated baby and a wise old man, and he's brought into Mike because Mike is playing these practical jokes. And the whole book, I'm just getting so nervous. I'm like, Mike is going to do something terrible. I mean, that's kind of a trope anyway. But I started thinking about that today. It's like we have AI that's like way better than this. Like I follow all these bot accounts on Twitter. That there's a Nicolas Cage plot bot that creates these Nicolas Cage movies. It's fantastic. And then there's this person does not exist, where it creates these faces of people that look photorealistic. And so and it's just kind of entertaining. But I don't depend on these AIs at all. But that's what gets me kind of nervous about modern society. It's like, where are we going to start relying on AI way too much, where we trust it more than we should? Because that was the situation they were in. They're like, let's just put our entire organization on the shoulders of Mike. And, surely he's not going to betray us. And I'm like, he's a practical joker. Like, that's literally how this starts.
Yeah, but Zach, there was a part. So I wasn't like you and Sagita. I didn't have that thought in the back of my head that Mike might betray them, because when he was first introducing Mike to the professor and trying to allay his concerns, and he said, well, if Mike is disloyal to the warden, why wouldn't he be disloyal to you? And he said, it's a feeling. And he was like basically trying to explain, how do you put into words, it's not logical, but how do you put into words that, like, this guy has my 6, this guy's loyal to me. It's a feeling. I can't really explain that, right? I thought that was
that's why I was hoping that it would not go down that route, where it would be a predictably kind of like, okay, Mike has his own agenda all along. We just didn't know it. So I'm glad it didn't happen.
Dangerosa Jones in the chat, I don't know if she can speak on or not out loud, but in the group chat that we can all see, said, that's one of the great things about this book. It's a great buddy movie waiting to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the thing though is only the thing that I was not expecting. I mean, I don't think the first time I read it, it was a while ago, so I don't remember expecting Mike to turn on them. But the thing that gave me reassurance was that Mike, no one recognized. Manny was the only one that took the time to consider that Mike was alive and to treat him with respect and dignity. So there was no risk of like Mike suddenly deciding he has allegiance to the warden. Maybe Mike having his own agenda is something that could happen, but I thought they laid it out at the beginning pretty well, that like, look, no one knows this guy. No one knows the computer exists. No one even thinks to look and interact with the computer. And so really Manny is his only tie to the world. In fact, Manny is his only, like, psychologically, Manny is the only person for a long time that gives him any psychological visibility as an entity. Because nothing else in the world can validate that he's alive other than Manny. So to me, I didn't actually, I never really felt like, oh, Mike's going to suddenly, have some reason to go choose the warden. But
well, I like the trust part, like any human could have his or her own agenda to suddenly whatever. Well, I had a different plan all along. Any human can do that to another human, but the level of trust and friendship I really liked the feeling, as I think, as Carrie said, it's a feeling. It's hard to explain. I just know. It
was interesting, the AI part of the story. I mean, like you say, he's come alive, and then Manny is his first friend, and they develop a relationship. But you could obviously tell that Heinlein was trying to say how he thought that AI was going to become infinitely more powerful in terms of knowledge and everything than, you know, us humans can be. And you know, and like some of you others of you have said, like the fear that maybe at the end, because he was the one who was controlling everything, at the end maybe like he's gonna turn on us and he's gonna get his way because he wants to hear more jokes or whatever it is he wants, right? He could have done that, but it didn't happen. But you know, he obviously came alive somehow. So if you extrapolate to a future world over past to where the story ends, you might think, well, if it happened once, it's going to happen again. Some other computer is going to come alive too and going to start doing something like that. Maybe what happened is that the Mike, in his infinite knowledge, discovered that instead of becoming tyrannical, he's like, I have to cut it off right here, and I'm just going to shut down in terms of communicating back.
Oh, that's great. That's a great thought. I didn't think about that. I really like that. That's great.
That's what I thought. Well, maybe he didn't die. I mean, he was still working as a computer. He was just not talking back. So
I was thinking that too, that he was deliberately taking himself out of it because he really didn't see that he was needed anymore at the time and thought, well, just let the humans go and, you know, let them do everything now for themselves.
And this could be something, there was a lot of instances where the professor and Mike planned something without telling anyone else. And this is one of those things that I could imagine the professor and Mike having a conversation about, look, Mike, this is what needs to be done. Like, you need to stop interacting at this point. Like, after this is what needs to happen. And no one ever got to explain it to Manny because the professor died. And so Mike carried on with the plan, and we never really know that it was actually part of a strategy. I could see that. I like that idea.
That's a good theory. I thought they left it up as a sequel. That's how I saw it. They left it open, and I didn't know there was one, but Harry pointed out The Cat Who Walks Through Walls is about that. I think I read that when I was 12. I don't remember. But I'm gonna
is that the one with Dory?
I don't remember.
Or is that a different one?
It is a sequel to the one with Dory. The one you're thinking of is The Number of the Beast with Dory. Okay. But The Cat Who Walks Through Walls comes after that. And it's Maureen, Lazarus Long's mother.
Oh, okay.
So, and how they manipulate things. So
there's a lot of cool.
Thanks for telling us.
There's a lot of cool AI, and I guess the right thing to say would be transhumanism in some Heinlein books later.
I've got a background in engineering and IT, and something that explains Mike's behavior is you're going to get an AI that's biased a certain way based on the data sets you use to train it. And then in the modern stuff, you then bring in human trainers to flag, this is cancer, this is not cancer, this is hate speech, this is not hate speech. So you have a phase where there's humans giving feedback on yes, no, acceptable, not acceptable, further refining the AI algorithms so that you get the final system acting the way you want. In this regard, Manny is that trainer training the AI how to behave, and that is demonstrated by the fact that the AI can emulate him so well that his co-husband does not think he is talking to someone other than his co-husband in the middle of the battle.
I got to push back on something here, and I've been going along with it because it's convenient, but Mike was not an AI. He was not created to be intelligent. He woke up naturally after he got over a certain number of interconnections. Nobody designed him to be intelligent. He was a natural intelligence.
Yeah, and I think the term AI is really overloaded because what Tamara was just talking about is like we don't actually have any AI presently. There is no real AI. We have machine learning. When people talk about AI, they mean machine learning. And like AI is kind of used very sloppily. I mean, maybe there's some attempts at AI in universities, but like there's none of the stuff we're talking about is AI that's happening now. It's actually machine learning. And
wait, can you just to help me out. What's the difference between machine learning
like
and
Tamara
AI?
said, right? Like machine learning is training things, like Tamara said, right? Like this is a horse, this is a cat, this is a horse, this is a cat. Here's a million pictures of horses and cats. Now here's a picture. What is it, right?
You're
Like
getting machine learning and AI that's intended for the censorship bots on commenting sections on Facebook and social media. And then you go, oh my God, it flagged a coconut is sexually explicit. We need to go back and retrain it. This is cancer. This is not. This is acceptable. This is not. So censor the communications, behave this way as a chat bot. And you've got lots of people interacting with it. Why does Manny think it has a conscience? He's been the main data set for training Mike in how to interact with people. And then his secondary people that he brought in interacting with the machine is YO and the professor. The professor is one of his teachers. So the reason he gets the idea that Mike is moral is he trained Mike what to think, what to do, what to feel, or was that major corrective feedback in main development. And there's a lot of people who mistakenly go, can't we have government by AI? It'll be neutral and know what to do. No, it's going to have the biases of the liberal programmers demonstrated by big tech and the censorship AI, and it's going to reflect the will of those in power, or else it's not even going to be put in authority, or if it really screws up, turned off. So a lot of people make the mistake of assuming AI is neutral, not recognizing you can have a bias baked into the algorithm at the very basic level that affects everything else it does. Now, Mike liking jokes did that with, I'm talking to people, and then you hear the toilet flush, and then Mr. Celine comes in. And so you had jokes that he was playing that he learned were funny that also made him look more human. So Mike still got some stuff in there, but he's following his program at the most basic level. Even when it's, you can't share this file without the password, let me tell you the password. Oh, and you want to talk about a way to do prescient of, I've password protected the files, but I haven't protected the passwords. Gee, that's a common security flaw in IT. And he predicted this before we really had much in terms of computers.
Yeah, I guess the thing I wanted to say though is like AI, when people think of AI, generally, colloquially, we think of the Terminator, we think of these like sentient computers that are making decisions that have basically some kind of free will, that are self-aware and are making kind of free will based decisions. And we don't even understand how the human brain works at all. There is no AI in that sense. There's nothing, we're not even close to anything like that at all. We're like nowhere near close to that. So the idea that like, yes, humans are trained through, similarly, by the way, we get information. Our parents say that's a cat and that's a dog or whatever, and we kind of learn, right? So I think there's a parallel there. We can train computers to mimic things and to, quote, learn how to behave in certain ways. But there is there's nothing remotely close to the idea of like a computer that has its own desires, its own free will. It decides it wants to go learn something in particular. I'm not an AI expert, but my inclination would be to say that that's probably not achievable without some of the inputs that humans have, specifically some of the chemical inputs that humans have, right? So
we're throwing the term around too loosely, right? So I think that's a good
That's
point.
what I'm saying.
You shouldn't be using AI. I just started using it. So what term would you use? Harry or Carter? Or?
I mean, everyone uses AI now. I just use machine learning, but they are used. One's a subset of the other. I just want to be careful that like we're not dealing with consciousnesses. Like Google's not created like a Google hasn't created a Mycroft out there like thinking for itself.
Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Artificial implies.
What term should we use for Mike?
Artificial implies like a designer creating it versus something like non-organic, meaning essentially what it means, something man-made, but not necessarily like bioinformatics is not necessarily like designed, and that's essentially what we're thinking about.
So I was going to go with a non-biological life form, but non-organic fits just as well. So
yeah.
But it is a life form.
Intelligence. It is a life.
It's a life form, whether it's biological or not. And then if you look at it, maybe doesn't matter what its initial biases were as inputs, it can transcend those because it is self-aware.
Oh yeah, that reminded me. So Tamara was going on about how who the creator is of a program builds in its biases, and that is actually perfectly displayed through the jokes with when Wyo and Manny both look at them and they disagree, and some of it turns out that Mike's sense of humor is more close to Wyo's than it is to Manny's.
Or he says he's Michelle. Yeah, I remember that part in the story. She's talking to Mike and she tells Manny, hey, it's not Mike, it's Michelle. Right? It's almost like a reflection back of who the computer's talking to.
And I thought that transformation where, and that was almost something that was somewhat human, is where we tend to somewhat parrot what other people are doing when we're communicating with them. And then Mike doing that with Wyo and then becoming somebody new made me start to think about what happens if and when Mike or this and anything like Mike would be released to the masses, where every single person would have access to this artificial intelligence in this case, and then have a different name, a different face, and imagine that they're actually talking to different people when it's all just one centralized intelligence. Maybe that's the new novel right there.
You mean like Alexa?
Yes. Yeah, like Alexa. If Alexa would change her name and personality depending on each person.
Alexa would then start to talk to me differently and maybe understand what I like in facial features and start to create a face that I would like. And kind of, what was that with Phoenix? Not River Phoenix.
The movie Her. Someone just said in chat.
Something
I
like
know what
that.
you're talking about.
Where it's all one, but everyone thinks they're talking to somebody else, and they kind of mold to what it is you need.
It's either that or we're all living in the simulation.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so on that point, I don't have an Alexa, but I just spent 2 weeks with my son, and they have an Alexa in there. And A, they have that you can take and upload other skins for Alexa, like Sam Jackson. And B, Alexa interacts differently with my son than she does my daughter-in-law. It's obvious.
Weird.
Yes.
Yeah, that's weird.
Now, Mike, like someone in chat pointed this out. I mean, Mike passes the Turing test, and so I think that's what, like, when I think of and if we're going to talk about an entity that's alive, it's got to pass the Turing test. And I guess a succinct way to say what I was saying before is we're not near having any sort of machine that can pass the Turing test at all.
I wanted to jump in and ask anyone who hasn't spoken yet, if you wanted to speak, no pressure, but Judge Lot, Cheeky Mare, Nick, Luval, is that how I say your name? Yuval, that's right, Yuval, Allison, any if you guys want to throw in your 2 cents, feel free.
Yeah, so I've been kind of thinking, well, how should we think about Mike in that case? If he maybe doesn't fit the bill of an actual AI, and perhaps one way of thinking about him is almost like an extension of the people he's interacting with, almost like a version of transhumanism, but instead of having instead of Manny's arm, it's like an extension of his brain or his capabilities in some way, his social group. So yeah.
I like the analogy you're making between Manny with his arm and Mike with his human characteristics. There's a cool blurry line between those two somewhere.
I also think that like there's a lot we don't know about like human consciousness, and so I think it's kind of hard to define like if a robot is sentient, if we can't even, we don't even know, like we don't know really. We can kind of guess, but we don't.
No, we have no idea how our brain works.
And so I think it's very like I love that Manny is Manny, and sometimes I think does he call him man sometimes, just man,
yeah,
my friend, yeah,
just man.
So I think I loved that because I just noticed that all the time, like, oh, they're playing with like he's a robot, he's man. And I also think that on top of that, the way that the short pigeon like language or whatever throughout the entire book, that's honestly, when I was reading this, I was like, sometimes I'm like, who's the robots and who are the, like, who's Mike and who are the humans? Like, they all sound like Mike, if anything, sounds more, intellectual or whatever. So that was interesting. But yeah, I think it's hard to define. It's impossible to define when does a computer become like legitimately like alive if we can't even decide if like dolphins like are sentient, or if we can't decide if we're like we don't even know how to define that in ourselves. So I think that's like another concept that you could like look into more.
Yeah, like even know how to define consciousness really. I think people, some people would define it as if they're religious, as having a soul, and then other people, I don't even know the minimum on what I should to even try to make the comment I'm about to make. So this is going to come out jumbled, but I started reading about consciousness, and it seemed like there's a lot of just debate and discussion on string theory and all this stuff that's way over my head in the scientific world. And it was hard for me to find even some sort of an agreed upon definition of what consciousness is.
Well, my connection is really bad, so if this doesn't work, I'll do some stuff on text. But there is a lot of work now in emergence, and Heinlein actually points to this, that Mike actually emerges when the connections get complicated enough, or something mysterious happens. Maybe it's the number of connections, maybe it's the quality of the connections between his parts. There's also a lot of work in evolutionary theory on not so much, consciousness, but also what they call individuality. So you have all these parts that are kind of doing their own thing, but then they cohere into something. And there's a lot of work on it. Simon Deacon, you should look him up. He talks about something surprising, constraints that actually make emergence happen, but there's all kinds of other theories. Anyway, I just thought it was cool that Mike actually emerges. He wasn't designed as an AI, and the other thing that's so clever about the Turing test is that we don't have to define consciousness. It's a test that doesn't require someone to say what consciousness is. You just have to appear to be conscious, and there's a lot of factors to that. I guess intelligence is one of them, but there's other things like understanding jokes maybe, or things that may not be definable, at least not at this point. Like, I don't know, just having compassion maybe could be one of them. How do you define that? It's kind of ineffable. Anyway, I really like the whole Mike thing, and I was I was really taken with it. So that's all I have to say about Mike.
There was an article I read a couple of years ago. It's from a neurologist, and this is way outside of my field or anything, but he made an interesting point that It's like he could stimulate the part of the brain that moves someone's leg, and then he told the person, "Oh, you moved your leg," and the person said, "No, you moved my leg." And so just, and his whole point was that, you know, the will is not simply like a neural impulse that causes a muscle to move, that there is a like an immaterial will that exists beyond like the physical brain. And that like experiment demonstrated it so clearly to him. I was really fascinated. I'll see if I can find it, but that's the fascinating thing about humanity, is like where does this will and intellect come from if it's not completely bound up by neurons? Like, where is that?
I mean, I think it is. I think they view it kind of like Yuval was saying, like in this emergent property that like you put these things together and there's this emergent property that comes out. I almost, just to throw a wrench in this, I almost don't know if it matters whether things are conscious or not, because from a perspective of how I would treat an entity, it would be, is it capable of, and I would say, can it respect my rights? And if it can, then I ought to respect its rights. And if it's not respecting my rights, I don't care if it's consciously not respecting them or not. I can initiate force against it. Like, if it's going to not respect my rights, I don't need to respect its rights. And it doesn't matter whether it's a human or a dog or a computer. I kind of don't care whether it's, quote, conscious. What I care about is how it behaves and how it relates with me. And if it relates with me in a way that's honorable, then fine.
One of the
very
things,
practical.
Racist, right? Or
One of
speciesist.
one of the things that like I keep going back to in this discussion, I love this discussion, taking it a step further from Will about consciousness and AI. So I think about Facebook or social media, YouTube. I think about the algorithms and how data doesn't equal consciousness as much as it wants to, even though it's people behind that making that. But so the two things that come to my mind is the heart is deceitful above all else, and between what is said and not meant and what is meant and not said, all love is lost. So what I think about is, when I think about machines becoming aware, we ourselves don't always know what we want, what our true motives are, what motivates us. And the idea of, I think it goes beyond will. It's an awareness, because we ourselves don't always understand why and what we do. And so you have a machine that's just taking data, but even what we're doing may not be what our true heart's desire is. So I find the whole discussion really interesting, because there's a part of me that's like, I don't know if you can learn that. I don't know if really understanding that aspect of humanity is possible. That's just my thought.
That reminds me of one of the quotes that I wrote down for this book. It's on page 11 in this copy. And it says, perhaps I note, and this is Manny talking about Mike. He says, perhaps I noticed his self-awareness almost as soon as he did. Self-awareness takes practice. And that quote reminded me, I help with my youth group at school or at church. And some of these teenagers, I'm just like, come on, you can't say that sweeping sweeping stereotype about someone you don't even know, and you're talking to that group right now and you don't know. Like, the self-awareness and self-reflection, and I think that's a real tragedy that not more people are self-aware even as adults. So to have a computer be self-aware,
Yeah.
self-awareness takes practice. So
I like that idea that you say self-awareness takes practice. And it reminds me, Carl Jung wrote something about that I really remember, that had something to do with the moment a child becomes self-aware. And it reminded me of this idea that you're not necessarily born, you wake up and it's like, oh, wow, it's not even that you're not too developed to a point where you can speak. Even beyond speaking, usually around 7, 8 or so, there is a moment that most people have in their life when you look back on your memories where you start to realize that it's not just you, but it's you, and you're surrounded by a world that you affect and it affects you. And after reading that, it reminded me of that specific memory that I had. And I think that, and I like how you said that, Cheeky. I feel funny saying cheeky. I like how you said that because it reminds me of that and how Heinlein takes that real concept of not only becoming aware, but then having to continue to practice what it means to be aware as part of a maturation process.
Yeah.
I'm curious of everyone's thoughts on the Federated Nations. That reminded me of the United Nations a lot. And it seemed like they had control over the earth already, and they were the ones negotiating. It wasn't like I know a couple individual countries are like, okay, yeah, don't bomb us or don't. But it just seemed like the Federated Nations had already taken over and become like a world government.
So in this book, it wasn't as explicit, but in a lot of his books, his prediction was by the year 2000 that we would have a world government. So it points out a lot of the problems with that, because there's certain ideologies that outnumber us by a lot. So it's a constant fight to keep I don't want to say liberalism because it's become a bad word, but Western freedoms in place.
Yeah.
There's I'm going to there's some interesting chat stuff going on, so maybe we can just pull some of that out. So Alex, you were saying in chat that, hey, I don't, I think Carter has said in the past, like, oh, we need to get people more angry, and you're saying, well, anger actually wasn't that helpful. Like the Prof and Manny and Waya weren't angry, and I would argue that I don't think anger is helpful for planning things and for being rational, but they recognized that they needed the masses to be angry or they would not win. They spent years on agitprop trying to get people upset because they were too complacent. So I would argue that anger was actually needed in order for them to have any chance of winning.
I think a balance
what's your
of it,
counter
though.
to that?
I think a balance of it, though, because they still needed the people to work. And
of course.
And like do the things they were supposed to do. And the problem is, like, if you get people too addicted to anger, they can't do anything but rage. We've seen that. They go on social media and they just scream their heads off and maybe crash their cars. So it's like it can be useful, but in doses. Like it can't be like your everything. And certainly the people at the top can't be like addicted to anger. And
yeah, but I don't think I was making that argument at all.
No. So. I didn't mean that. I mean, no, but like more like that. Not to say that you were wrong, but to say that a balance is needed between anger and rational thinking.
Yeah, I just argue that anger can be a motivator. And to the extent that it motivates you to take the actions that are the rational actions and do the things that are needed, that's great. To the extent that it motivates you to stew in your own crap and do stupid things, it's destructive, just like almost any emotion, right? Love can be a great motivator, and it can also be horribly distracting and not actually helpful. So I kind of view
there's also a line in the book. There's a line in the book where it says the professor sets them straight and told them it's easier to get people to hate than to get them to love. This is after the part where they're talking about not being able to inspire patriotism really in people, or if they did have patriotism, they had it for whatever country they had come from. And I just underlined that because I was thinking about how that seems to be true, at least the way it bears out in our elections. I can't remember. I mean, was there ever a time where the campaign focused on what you should love about this candidate instead of on what you should hate about the other one? Most of them seem to be run based on this is what to hate about the other guy. And
I think that's
so
been
I
true
was
for a
thinking
while
about
too,
that,
right?
and like, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with you.
I don't know.
And the fascinating thing about that, sociology says, the theory of reactance says that negative campaigning is actually counterproductive.
But people
Really?
do it,
'Cause
so
it
it must
seems
be
to be-
working.
Yeah.
I think the opposite. That negative ads really work very well.
Well, if you
I have no data for that, so
there's a YouTuber, Aiden Paladin, who takes and looks at current events and what kind of sociology studies say about those current events, and she can take and she points out a bunch of articles on reactance and how negative campaigning takes and responds. Now, one of the things that the studies find out is that if you already have a hardened opinion on somebody, right, it's not going to take and change your mind. But like negative ads on Trump get Trump supporters out in force. It
works the opposite then.
Yeah, that's what they call reactance.
Yeah,
I see.
So.
Yeah.
One of the things I saw was interesting in this book in terms of how the revolution was done was that it was like a small group of elites that was really pushing this and setting it up and was behind everything. And then later, when they are setting up a government, they make sure that all their people are elected in it, which I thought was interesting. But I've been reading this other book that was talking about the Russian Revolution. And this is true, the American Revolution, too, that it was a bunch of, elites who were communists. They were in academia. When they were exiled to Siberia, they formed groups in Siberia that were eventually came back to help with the revolution. And in the United States, when you look at who's writing the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they're well-educated people who have a bunch of different influences, particularly ancient Greece and Rome. And they are only a third of the population. So they were a third, and then the other people who didn't want to revolt from England were another third, and there were another third that don't care. So just as an example, I grew up in a very small town in New York State, and it was part of the estate of the Livingston family. The Robert Livingston, I think he's one of the signers of the Constitution, he was pro leaving England, but all his small farmers on his estate were not. So it's kind of interesting that these revolutions are pushed by some kind of an elite, and the theme is there in the book too.
Yeah, I think he even says at some point, we don't need the masses,
right?
Which is interesting, kind of challenges some of my assumptions about revolution.
Yeah, I read some things that Mancuso says that it's the elite that has to wake the masses up and get them going.
So
eventually.
So Heinlein had no trust in the masses. In fact, I believe, I'm pretty sure it's a Heinlein quote from one of his books. I can't remember which one. That you can take and tell the intelligence of the committee by taking the smartest person in it, and you divide his intelligence by the number of people in the committee, and that would be the effective intelligence of the committee.
Wow.
That's a great rule.
Probably true.
And if you doubt it, just look at Congress.
Yeah, he clearly had no respect for government bureaucracy and Congress.
Can you repeat what you just said? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
So to figure out the effective intelligence of a committee, you pick the intelligence of the smartest member on the committee, and you divide it by the number of people on the committee.
Okay, thanks.
And the other thing he says that if a committee accomplishes anything, it's because of one or two people that they can manage to take and do something despite the rest of the people on the committee.
Yeah, I love his cynical view of the whole government when he sets it up. He's like, oh, just let them all talk, and the more they talk, the less they'll get done. And I'm like, I think a lot of people have that view of our government right now, that the best thing they can do is just waste time debating, so they just stay out of the way. And I thought that was entirely true.
Zach, I don't know how long you've been watching Unsafe Space, but I'm going to out Carter. He said this on air before. Carter doesn't really vote usually because he's an anarchist. He did vote for Trump, but he said previously, isn't this right, Carter? You said you used to vote for whatever party you liked, or whatever party was in the minority.
Deadlock.
He voted for deadlock, so they would just be talking and not get nothing done. I was like, what are you doing?
Because nothing is better than anything they ever do. So
I'm with Carter on that
article at one point.
He should be called Prof from now on.
Yeah.
So I am with Carter on that. If we had a Democratic Senate and Congress, I voted for a Republican president. If we had Republican Senate and Congress, I voted for a Democrat, because limiting their ability to do anything has much higher priority than anything government tries to accomplish.
Yeah, the worst thing you can have is one of the parties think they have a mandate and the votes to do something. Then they'll start doing stuff, and they never do anything good.
You have to understand, this is flipping the way that I've thought about government for so long. That's why I still am having trouble grasping it, but I do have a really healthy appreciation for it. It's a joke that's funny more than once.
I've thought the same thing for decades. Yeah,
Always funny.
More than once funny.
That was brilliant, Carrie. Well done.
The absolute optimum Congress is 50-50 Democrat and the worst is what Carter said, one party has majority. It doesn't matter which one, it's the same thing.
But I think the problem now, though, is we have a permanent bureaucracy, and the way the Congress passes laws, they do it in such a way to make them so vague that the bureaucracy can interpret them any way they like. And so we don't even really need Congress. We're run by the bureaucracy.
Yeah, and that's inevitable, right? Because, we've gotten away from ancient Rome, they put their laws on the tablets in town square because they thought that everyone needed to be able to read all the laws and understand what they can get away with. Now there's no one person that knows all the laws. If you include the regulations, there's no way, no one could possibly even read them in their lifetime. And so there's an entire bureaucracy that decides what's legal and illegal for us to do. And you can't, just because you get elected to Senate doesn't mean you can make sense of any of this. You rely on bureaucrats. You're like, well, this is what you should do, and you should do that, and you should repeal this thing, and this article over here matters, and strike this line here, and they have no idea how all this fits together. They can't.
And that's why you end up with a load of stupid laws where they ban drugs and make various stupid things illegal.
Right.
That even comes up in the book where Manning and the professor are talking to this committee, and they think they're talking to the heads of the planetary Congress, and they're getting nowhere of, we want our independence. They said, no, we're doing what's best for Earth. You're a dependency of Earth. You have to do what we say. And you've gone through 2 days or 3 days of arguments, and they find out you're not talking to the heads of the Congress. You're talking to the heads of the committee that are in charge of Luna. So you're going through this level of bureaucracy, and you don't even know. It's like when you the EPA gives you a stupid ruling contrary to local zoning stuff, and they tell you appeal it to the EPA admin judge that is going to defer to what his EPA boss has said, and you really don't have an outside process to go around that.
One of the things that I loved, I don't know if you guys remember this part, basically where there was a long section about part of the book talking about the government structure, but I loved, it actually made me laugh, where they were talking about, I'll summarize, it was kind of like, oh, like, you know, you petition for who you want to be in charge of you, and then they're your responsibility, like whoever petitions for you, like, and they're like, and it's kind of like, oh, whoa, wait a second. And then there's a shortly after that, obviously taxes have a big role, but then when they're like, who's going to pay for stuff? And they're like, hey, you're in, that's, you know, that's your thing. You figure that out. And I just thought it was really interesting because it brought it back to the importance of the individual in government, in that, you know, being a public servant or taking on that responsibility. I think it's so easy talking about bureaucracy to get into that position and be like, okay, but I liked this idea of like petitioning, and whoever votes for you, and this was my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, whoever votes for you, like you're in charge of them, like you take care of them. Not only that, like you pay for it. And then I feel like it's like, oh, whoa, okay, you know. So I felt like that was a really interesting way for government. I don't know what anybody else's thoughts were on that.
I love those kind of like outside the box thoughts about government structure, and I agree with you. I think the interesting thing that the petitioning thing was interesting. I think what the idea was, if you get, I think it was 4,000 votes, then you get a seat. But all the people that voted for you, like you're now representing people who voted for you. Like you're like, those are the people you represent. There's no one in your area, like you're not representing anyone who didn't vote for you. You're only representing those people who voted for you. And I can you imagine, I just want to throw this out. Can you imagine having your tax form just have little check boxes on it that was like, I'd like to pay for this. I don't want to pay for this. I like to pay for this. I don't want to pay for this. Like literally, you only paid for what you wanted. I think it might change voting pretty dramatically.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Like I say, would you uncheck wars, foreign wars?
Right, no wars. I'll pay for some defense. Blah, blah, blah. But yeah,
that section, as you bring out, he throws out so many ideas. Like I listened to that one twice on Audible. Like he talks about, well, maybe one idea is maybe Congress, when they pass the law, they have to pay for it out of their own money. Like that's a good idea.
I love that.
And then when he lists the different things government does, I want to do one more example that I love. That, like Carter brought up the. He says all these things taxes pay for. Well, we don't want that. We don't want that. We don't want that. And like one of them is like, well, how about police and courts? Like, well, we don't want that. We don't have that. We don't need that. And then the next, shortly after that, he brings up an example, which is great, where the earther comes on to the girl. So they have to have a court. And he goes through this whole long thing. Like, here's how police work. Here's how courts work. Like, you don't need any of that by the government. And you have to pay everybody. And then they negotiate. And if the guy loses, they throw him out an airlock.
I thought when they're forming laws that he says something so profound where he's it's when he's back on Earth and he's being confronted by being in a polyamorous relationship, which okay, I'm not really in support of that, but he makes a very interesting point inside of that by saying there must be a yearning deep in the human heart to stop other people from doing as they please. Rules, laws, always for other fellow. Murky part of us, something we had before. Not one of those people said, please pass this so that I won't be able to stop doing something I know I should stop. Man, I thought that is so true, that so much of what we argue about in the political sphere is what we want to control other people from doing. It's not about self-control, and which I would say that's the realm of religion, really. It's more about changing things in your life. But this is exactly true what political debate about. It's like, I don't want them to own that or to use that or to be able to enjoy that or whatever. And how you reconcile that, I don't exactly know, but that was very profound on a fundamental level.
So I like the suggestion that he put in there to have two houses, one that passes laws, the other one whose only function is to repeal them. and it would take 2/3 vote to pass a law and only 1/3 vote to repeal it. So, and he made a good point. If 1/3 of your citizens think this law is too onerous to live with, you should get rid of it.
Yeah, there's been
kinda
other
like the,
things. Where was the place where you had to read the laws out loud? Like any new law had to be read at normal speed, like out loud, in order to get passed. And I think there's also been proposals for like for every word of new law added, you have to subtract one. Like there's some things that you could do where it was like, look, this is the set of laws. This is as long as it can be. So you really feel like you need to add something? Well, you're going to have to delete something else.
It reminded me of Trump. Wasn't it Trump that was saying for every regulation that we add, we're going to get rid of 2? And
I think he said 5, right? Didn't he really do something?
Yeah, it was 5.
5? Wow. Okay.
And he did.
Yeah.
He did. I mean, you don't hear about it in the press or anything, but he did. He followed up on that.
That's interesting.
I wanted to point out, so I kind of going back to the masses versus elite type thing. I thought there was something really insightful in this book, and it's on page 69 in my copy. So it's talking about like, okay, revolution is a science only if you are competent to practice, blah, blah, blah. Done clumsily or prematurely, and the result is civil war, mob violence, purges, terror. And I just think that's happening right now. Like I don't know if you want to look at it from an angle of like SJW ideology and the colleges spreading to everything and inciting rage and whatever. I don't know what exactly. There could be a lot of different ways of reading that because I think there's just a lot going on right now. But I think that's like whatever is happening right now, like someone who's trying to control things is not doing it properly because there's mobs, there's civil unrest, there's a lot of tension right now, which maybe that's a good sign that not that those things are good, but that we're gonna come out of this like, I don't know, like maybe there's something to that. Like if there's so much, I don't know how I want to say this. Like there's things seem to not be going according to plan. Because if you wanted to completely take things over and make like have that be successful, like you wouldn't have people doing it badly and butchering things. Like I think like, okay, like a concrete example of this would be like people are really starting to wake up to critical race theory and things like that, where it's like this is if it had been executed properly, people would have successfully been brainwashed simultaneously or whatever, and nothing ever, like that would be the new reality. But there's enough people that have butchered it, and now people are like, that's not cool, we can't have this. So I think that kind of thing is happening. Like I think we're in that reality right now.
So I think you're right, Allison, but I would like to point out that what even proves Heinlein's case even more is think about if they had pushed this stuff 10 years ago. I mean, you think you have a lot of reaction now. I believe if they had pushed it 10 years ago, it wouldn't have just been the Proud Boys out in the street. You know what I'm saying? So now they jumped it off a little early, but
I don't think there's an orchestrated revolution in that sense happening though, right? I don't think there's not like an SJW equivalent of Mike and Manny and Prof and Y that are doing anything. It's just, this is kind of how societies decay when you have bad ideas.
Well, I think it's to her point, to Allison's point. It's maybe because it's not properly organized. And I do agree with you though, Harry, that I think if they had popped it off 10 years ago, more people would have woken up, and that 10 years was very critical in pushing some of these ideas slowly into the mainstream and getting you to accept some of this stuff, and not all at once. Right. But I do think maybe you could look at it and say, yeah, it's a revolution that's not organized. And maybe that will lead to its downfall, because I would say it's, I'm looking at that line that you read, Allison, done clumsily or prematurely. yeah, it kind of sped up in June and July of this year, really prematurely, I think. I hope.
Well, but he doesn't say it's unsuccessful in the end because it's done
Right.
clumsily. It just leads to some violence on the way.
It's
Like
bloody.
there's plenty of revolutions that have been done clumsily, immaturely, led to a lot of blood, and still the Marxists got their way at the end of the day. Like,
Damn.
That's what I'm thinking. Didn't the Marxists set this up to subtly take over society? Like it wasn't supposed to be a big revolution like they had in Russia. I thought it was more like we'll take control. We'll have our intellectuals that came into the US in the 50s or 60s or whenever it was. And then they slowly propagated this. And so now it's, elementary school teachers are learning this and teaching it to the kids. So, it's.
So I think the phrase you're looking for, Ben, is the long march through the institutions.
Yeah, Ben, like Yuri Bezmenov talked about, that's what you're describing, this slow conquering of a civilization through ideology.
It's just how bad ideas propagate. Bad ideas are like a cancer. They're cancer memes. And like when you let them spread, especially when you let them metastasize into education, this is what happens.
And part of it is the fact that on a like cursory glance, it looks good. Like, you're like, oh yeah, people, sometimes there's problems and things are unbalanced and we got to fix that. And you're like, oh yeah, we got to care about our fellow man. Like that's in there.
Yes, socialism is only sharing.
Yeah. So it looks pretty like out of focus, but the closer you get to it, the worse it is. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought I was talking about. Like even over this last year, I learned more about what the SJWs really wanted. And like I know just new discourses talks about what's your breaking point on following it. And for me, it was the anti-interracial relationships. So like, like you have a point like where you learn so much where it's like, whoa, and your brain breaks and you go, okay, no, this isn't pretty. This isn't nice. This is awful. And I made a mistake.
Yeah, and that's why I still have a little bit of hope, because I think like, yes, like we don't know the ending to our story. Like we don't know how things are going to go in our society, but I do think that like there's been, because it is clumsy, I think that there's been enough people that like myself included, like that's why I'm here right now. Like where I was like, that's a breaking point for me. I can't tolerate this anymore. And I can't go along with it because I'm seeing the true root. So I am hopeful that we're not, that there's enough people like that, but I'm also very fearful because it's now, I think like Ben said, it's in the elementary schools and it's touted around as a good thing. And that terrifies me. So yeah, I don't know. I'm 50-50.
I wanted to go ahead.
Oh, I think at some point, so much of what's being driven through our culture is the root of it is just a terrible cynicism. When international adoptions were fell under the axe of criticism, and that for me that was a breaking point. I have so many friends that have had international adoptions, and so and international interracial adoptions. So when that started to be criticized like openly, and it didn't fit the paradigm of what people were trying to push politically, that's where I was like, I can't go along with any of that now. And that, that's where I absolutely draw the line, because children need a home, and so are you going to cling to some ideology is your highest good, or the highest good of children that just need a family? But do people really believe that like that adoption is furthering some kind of injustice? Well, no, because adoption is obviously solving an injustice. So I just wonder if people that say those kind of things actually believe them, or if it's just their cynicism kind of driving the car down the road. And then you start to unpack, well, pretty much everything else they're saying is just cynical. and it's just a really terrible view of reality. So
Yeah, I view it more as like not. Maybe some people, if it's cynicism, but for me, it's more like you get social points, you get clout if you go along, if you say, yeah, we're doing this diversity training now at our company, or just little tiny gestures that you do to that you show to your friends to prove that you're woke, like that. I have so many friends that are deeply in the woke mentality, and I don't think they understand where it's headed yet, because I was the same way. And so yeah, that's I think another angle. I think it's there's a social element that's another thing that just terrifies me. It's same as the schools. It's like, if it's a social thing, you're not gonna, now it's kind of in a bubble where it's like you're not really thinking about it as much because it's trendy now, and you're not thinking about the true ramifications. So you're either operating out of fear or like almost like this sort of ego sort of thing to appear popular, or to be, yeah, virtue signaling basically.
Well, and I think that's like what the Christians mean by not being a Christian. I'll try. I'm not speaking for Christians, but like, I think that's what the Christians mean by like this society being spiritually bankrupt, right? And I would say it's philosophically bankrupt, but it doesn't matter. There's a bankruptcy with respect to whether you want to call it philosophy or spirit. Of just we've decayed into a sort of nihilistic hedonism, and so they're virtue signaling because it's practical to virtue signal, not because they have any virtues. So, in fact, virtue is kind of not a real word. It's not a word that's used. Like, no one actually cares about having actual virtues. They care about the practical advantages they can get about with respect to signaling certain virtues, or feeling good about themselves by signaling certain virtues, or whatever it is. But there's not any substance there. That was too depressing to mention.
Well, my pastor gave a great sermon today about truth, what's true versus what's real. Real meaning sort of, I guess you could take it to mean, in this case, like what's immediate, and this social religion, this is immediate, it's real. You can feel the consequences immediately if you don't speak it, if you don't pile on in the threads, if you don't show that, like you're talking about, Allison, that you're a member of the woke. And he was sort of talking about how it's human nature to choose what is real over what's true. I know it's confusing, and I'm whatever. I'm taking it out of context, but you're making me think about the difference between the way he was defining real, as in something that we can grasp easily, versus truth. And pursuing truth is much scarier, and truth may not be so obvious and popular. But speaking of spiritual bankruptcy, Carter, I wanted to take it to something Lindsay was saying earlier about the themes, and how and what Alex was talking about how a lot of in her classes they were teaching you to just write to theme primarily, and then Lindsay was saying, but theme is a part of it. It is a part of it. And then she mentioned the theme for her. I'm going to paraphrase Lindsay, but you were saying the theme for this book for you was that all systems eventually might become tyrannical. So I want to see what other themes people took from it, because one of the themes I took from it, which I think is an uplifting theme, is on page 79, when they're giving, I like that these three characters come together, or four, if you include Mike. They come together in the cause of revolution, but they all have different reasons and different ways that they kind of different paths to get there. And I really liked Wyo's reasoning, or she says that she's approaching it differently, because this is after Manny said he's not going to participate in a revolution unless he has at least 1 in 10 odds. So for him, it's about numbers, right? That's you, Carter, maybe. I don't know. But Wyo says revolution is an art that I pursue rather than a goal that I expect to achieve, nor is this a source of dismay, because a lost cause can be as spiritually satisfying as a victory. I thought that was really beautiful.
Was that Wyo, or was that Press?
That was Wyo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like something Prophet would say.
Oh, yeah, maybe. So, and then he, Manny says, well, not me, sorry, it's not a thing of art for him. It's not a spiritual satisfaction, for him, even if he needs to think he has a shot of winning. So,
yeah,
I
by
thought
the
that
way,
was a good
Carrie, I'm
theme.
going to push back. I would say
Okay.
I'd probably side with Wyo more on that than
Oh,
with Manny.
interesting.
It's
Okay,
worth pushing
cool.
back regardless of the odds. You just have to be careful of how you push back. So, you don't do dumb things, but yeah.
I agree with that. It's always worth it because it's your own integrity and your principles.
That's right.
And if you're not fighting for that, then you're not really yourself.
You're not alive. You're not you. Yeah.
So
yeah.
So now I'm not like a literary guy, but one of the themes I noticed in this book was at the beginning of the book, Manny was like a dad to Mike. And by the end of the book, Mike was being more like a dad towards Manny. So the growth in their relationship and the reversal of that relationship seems to be a fairly common theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about that. I do not have children, but I've heard people have children talk about how their children raised them in a way, I think, meaning caused them to grow necessarily so.
In terms of themes, I'm just going to pick on Beverly, who's in chat, but she sent this to me on Discord. And I don't know if she meant it for it to be a theme, but it could be. One of her favorite lines is, "Society adapts to facts or dies." I think that could definitely be one of the themes. If I was to step back and look at the book, it's like, well, people have to, things have to change. You adapt to new circumstances, or eventually things fall apart, and people die. So I don't know, throwing that out as a possibility.
I'm not sure.
Shortly after the Carrie's discussion, Carrie was talking about the discussion of everyone's reasons. It was just shortly after that, something I noted. I don't know that it really has anything to do with theme as much as there was a section talking about the importance of genius, and this part really touched me. And it goes to some of the stuff we've been talking about just in our current current social situation, but the importance of this revolution to fight for innovation and for genius. In a way, it said, the way I read it, that the genius and innovation was the only way that this is just my summarization of it. Genius and innovation and creativity, freedom for that is the only way to truly be free. And so I guess it is kind of, you could see it as a theme, but that part really stood out for me. I don't know if it did for anyone else.
Yeah, Mike said he can't account for genius. I think that's the part you're talking about when he's doing all the calculations.
Yeah, it's like I can factor all of this in, but I can't factor for success unless unless this piece exists, and that is completely independent of any system. And I just thought that was really, it made me think a lot about what that is. And even going back to our discussion about AI and data, and just tying it in, that spontaneous, and bringing it to what's going on in our current, the current atmosphere. I saw an article, I don't know if anybody saw this, about the Dalton School demands to change, or the attack on Gifted and Talented. Terry, you posted that. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, I'd read that, and it made me think about how, is that if you had to point to one thing, is that the thing? I don't know.
Oh, you mean the one thing that wakes you up? I think that could be a breaking point for some people. If you guys haven't seen it in the past couple of days, there's been some very explicit attacks on gifted and talented programs at schools, on AP classes, and on very explicitly saying they want to eliminate these things.
It's interesting to me that the same people that claim that their socialism or Marxism or whatever is driven by some sort of love for humanity never really stop to consider how they hamstring the geniuses in humanity. Like they're always talking about how, well, we have to worry about these people over here that need help and these people, and we have to do these things so that these people that need help get help. But the cost that is never factored in is that kind of very difficult to measure effect that this has on people who would be massively productive and massively contribute in like almost in like a step function way to humanity, right? In a way that Mike couldn't account for, because Mike could only do incremental changes. He could only predict incremental changes, right? And a genius comes along and there's some breakthrough and it massively changes things. And when you do not let people, when you do not allow people to be free, when you prevent them from the freedom to interact and do what they want in exchange voluntarily, you end up quashing the likelihood that you get that breakthrough, that genius to come along.
Well, Carter,
yeah.
Central planners have to. They have to squash genius. They have to squash innovation, because otherwise they get their 5-year plans all going together, and some genius comes along and invents the cotton gin, and it takes and throws all their plans out of the way. There's no way to take and do central planning and allow innovation at that magnitude at the same time. And you have to have that innovation.
The answer to
central
that,
planners.
Sorry, I was just going to say the answer to that is flatten every tire on your car, so it's equal for everybody. There's no geniuses, and the car goes nowhere.
And then you go nowhere.
Right. And that the central planners imagine, this is the thing with central planning, is because the human relations are so complex and society is so complex that it's actually impossible to centrally plan it optimally. It's just impossible. But central planners, they often have this view of things kind of like a cheap and incompetent version of Mike, where they think things are going to be the same, and they can kind of try and predict incremental improvements, but they can never wrap their head around what disruptive changes may happen and when they may happen. And so any disruptive change, as you're saying, is like just upsets the apple cart in a major way for them. So they think that they can just plan stuff out and everything will remain the same forever, and they'll just kind of tweak it and optimize it, but everything will just be the same forever.
And they can't account for genius.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they want their own situations to improve, not necessarily anyone's else, because they're selfish. Let's face it. Part of the 5-year plan for them is that things get better for them.
Yeah, they get a promotion because their 5-year plan worked.
I just wanted to read from the chat, because I don't know if she can speak. I don't know if her audio works. Dangerosa Jones says, part of the premise of the book is that Manny is setting the historical record straight. So I guess the overarching theme for me is, do you really know what's going on? Because Manny does probably know, but the rest of the masses absolutely do not. And the people reading the histories certainly do not.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And Dangerous has got some insights.
Yeah.
Carter, what you're saying about central planners and trying to keep everything the same, that's where we're headed now with this overemphasis on equality. And certainly equality is a virtue, but we have other virtues in our country, such as liberty and justice. Justice
is
for
equality
all.
a virtue? How is equality a virtue?
Well, all men are created equal. So just
no, they're not. That's just not true.
Well,
the only way in
equal
which
how?
equality is a virtue is through equal treatment under the law. Then it's a virtue.
Sure.
But equality as such is thrown around as this thing that we're supposed to praise, and equality is horrific. Equality is just not true. It's unreal. No two people are born the same in the same circumstances with the same genes and same skill set and same opportunities. It just doesn't. It's not true.
Well, that's why you have to define terms, though, because I think he was talking about equality under the law.
But everyone, but
Right.
people don't.
Equal
But people
rights.
use that. People use the word equality, and good people, probably like Zach, are thinking to themselves, equality under the law. But people don't hear. That's not what people hear. They say, well, these two people have an unequal circumstance, therefore that's not equality. And like, well, that's not what Zach's talking about. So I think we just need to be very careful when we talk about equality being a virtue. Equality is not a virtue. Equality is not even real. It's not a thing. It does. People aren't equal.
But equality under the law is real.
Well,
Yes.
it should be. Yes.
Well,
That's a
equal. You know, I think about people being equal in dignity, equal in value, equal in worth.
They're not
and-
equal in
and
dignity,
that kind of
though, right? And they're not
What?
equal in value.
Oh, yes, they are.
No,
They
they're not.
may not act equally.
Because there's no objective standard for value. Like people are
Define
valued
value. Yeah, value.
Right. It's like value for what purpose? Like I'm of no value on the basketball court. Other people are much higher value on the basketball court than I am. Like we're not of equal value depending on the goal and the use, right? And some people actually aren't of equal dignity. Like there are horrible serial killer, pedophile, child killer, rapist people that I would say do not qualify as equal in dignity as far as I'm concerned to other people. Like people aren't even equal in those respects. And I don't know why there's such a fear to admit that humans are unequal. We've been brainwashed to think that anything we say where like humans are unequal is somehow some horrible sin. It's just not. It's not a sin. It's just reality.
You don't even have to go to serial killers. I know a lot of normal people that are just a waste of air.
Okay. Wait, first of all, we hijacked
like the
Zach's
phrase.
comment because you got honed in on that word equal, Carter. I would like to hear the rest of Zach's thought.
That's fair. That's fair. I got distracted. I went on a tangent. I'll shut up.
Yeah. Well, just minor tangent to answer the tangent. I can only answer this from a Christian perspective, is that people have the image of God, so they're equal in value that way. But also people are fallen, so they are equal in being sinners. And of course, some people sin more than others. Some people live better lives than others. But I can only say that people are equal in terms of their inherent value, not in terms of their worth of society. Because I don't think in utilitarian terms. But my main point though is that liberty, equality, and justice are values that all have to be upheld. And I think we're in this cultural moment where equality is held up as the top value, or perhaps the only value. And that has to be in tension with these other values, because, let's go the other direction. If liberty is the only value, well, then why shouldn't I own a howitzer tank or an A-bomb, or just be able to do whatever I want, however it destroys other people? You can go to extremes in any direction, but the balance of society is holding all of these together. And so, when I hear people just saying these words, equality or even liberty or even justice, and that's like the only note they're playing on an instrument. Like all of these notes have to be played together. And so that's where I think this kind of revolutionary moment we're in is going to hit a brick wall, because you can't just have one theme or one value that you're chasing after.
Oh, I agree, Zach. But the main problem with that is we got 15 participants on right now. At one point, we were up to 20. And of those 15 participants on right now, I don't think we could all sit down and hammer out an agreement on what the definitions of equality, liberty, and justice are.
Probably true.
Plus, I think we would need to take the IQ of the smartest person and divide it by 15 to figure out how effective we're going to be. Maybe drop a few people off chat.
Okay, I just want to. I'm not going to argue about the value stuff too much. I'm going to make one point, and I'm going to encourage people to think about it. Whenever I hear the word value, I always add to whom, for what. There is no objective inherent value to things. It doesn't exist. So the question is value to whom, for what. It's a conscious being values. Valuing is an action taken by a conscious being. So to talk about an inherent value, gold isn't inherently valuable. There's nothing inherently valuable. Things are valuable to people for purposes. And that's all of my thinking can be understood. All my arguments around this and around freedom and all this like liberty, all that can be understood starting with this idea that like there aren't these absolute things. There's not a metaphysical, the universe doesn't value people.
I think that's where I think I'm not the only one who'll disagree with you about this, because I think that people do have an objective value because God values them. God loves people and values people, and that is an objective value.
Right, that's the
This is
difference
why
between
you
the
are not
atheist
gonna agree
and the
with that
Christian.
because
right.
you're an
Yeah.
atheist. Yeah.
I think that might be where that disagreement stems. Is a belief in is a belief in a deity or not, or specifically a difference in a belief, like a Christian worldview versus an atheist worldview.
So
Yeah,
like
I
that's
think that's fair to say. I think it's fair to say, Carter, that if there's not a God, then who do we ultimately value, or who do we ultimately matter to? Like, who ultimately puts value on us? I guess that is harder to answer. And I'm not trying to trick you or anything, but I see your point that you're making.
No, I get it. And actually, I would say if you do believe in a God, you can use what I just said and just say, yeah, well, the valuer is the deity that I believe in,
Sure.
and this is the purpose.
Sure.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I think that's very honest to put it that way.
I just think, like, from my perspective, like as someone who used to be religious and now I'm quasi-spiritual, I don't even know, but I will, to my dying day, think that Christianity is one of the best attempts at creating, let's say that it was a man-made religion. Let's just take that premise for a sec. That's a beautiful way of trying to get societies en masse to value human life. And I think it's absolutely beautiful in that way. And so I think that I have yet to be shown an example of an atheist society that doesn't crumble. Not that Christianity has had a perfect track record, or any religion has had a perfect track record, but I just think that maybe it's going back to the consciousness we were talking about earlier. Like, if you don't believe that humans have a soul or a spirit or self-awareness or whatever, like, the society just goes south. Like, you just stop. I don't know. There's something deep in our psychology, I think, that we need that assumption, because if you go too far down the like I think that's why it's important to say like yeah, we're made in the image of God or something. There's something about, like, my take on that is more like there's patterns in the entire universe that are eerily similar, and like humans might have that too. And I don't know, there's just something like magical, for lack of a better term, about that. And I think if you take all the magic out of it and you structure a society where no, there's nothing special, there's nothing magical, there's nothing mysterious about anything, it's just this cold, dark world, that's when you get genocide. That's when you get, I mean, the end extreme of that is genocide and things like that. So that's sort of like my soapbox for that topic.
I'm also an atheist, but I don't agree with Carter.
Okay, cool.
And I didn't grow up religious either. I grew up in an irreligious home. So for me, there's billions of people in the world. So on a large scale, that means one human doesn't matter that much, like, from that perspective. However, when we die, nothing happens to us, and our whole existence is subjective. We can only ever experience our own life, and it's limited. And that has value to us as individuals. So of course, everyone's individual pain and happiness matters. And you have to do what you to them, exactly.
Right, but I would agree with you.
But
it doesn't matter
empathy,
existentially, it matters to me. My life matters to me and
yes,
to people that
but
love me.
if you can reconcile that in your brain, that everyone feels that way, then you should also value them, because if you're an empathetic human being, you can understand that they feel the same way I do.
Well, I would agree with you. I think I can say that I would think, actually, I don't think people value themselves equally. There are certainly self-hating people who don't value themselves, and there are certainly people we all know who value themselves too much. So like, but I do think, I will say, like, yes, I understand that everyone has that feeling, but that doesn't make the feeling, like, that doesn't mean people value. People are valued objectively. That's not it's still a subjective thing. They have a value to whom? To themselves. For what? For whatever purpose purpose of their lives. I don't need to think that they have some sort of objective value in order to treat them well. I just need to have a set of morals derived from human right, but basically natural law and human rights and individual rights. I need to have a set of morals about how to treat another conscious entity that can understand rights. So like, I don't need to have some kind of like, you have value thing. I just need to know that I need to treat them well, right? Does that make sense? I don't need an objective value.
One of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of the book in this conversation is, I don't know if you guys saw it this way, but I don't remember there was never a development of a new religion or any kind of attempt to control through religion. But one of the things they referenced a lot was they would describe a country or a group of people, and they would kind of say, oh, they find life sacred or life isn't sacred. And so they described it in terms of, in that way, instead of really sort of a system of religion, which I found really interesting. And Allison, some of the things that you were talking about just really made me think a lot, because this is a much more nuanced conversation, but I tend to think of religion as a system of control. I don't say this out loud a lot, but I believe, like you say, something like Jesus, the historical Jesus, and what Jesus actually teaches. I see like the establishment or institution of religion as the theory of equality, whereas I find something like Jesus, it could even be, doesn't have to be Jesus, but I see Jesus as a path towards self-awareness, and it's not necessarily about seeing everyone as equal as much as it is. I think it's less when we talk about value and equality. The only thing that I keep going back to is like, the more self-aware I am, the better I can treat other people. So it's kind of a layered thought process based on what everybody has said, but yeah, just tying it back to the book as far as how they reference sacred, whether life is sacred or not, and that just made me think of all this stuff.
Should we wrap it up and get any last thoughts on the book? Because I think we could go down a rabbit hole here on like.
This has been really interesting. Yeah.
Fun, but yeah.
So I know a couple people already had to take off. Thomas had to take off. I think Tamara. If anybody wants to share final thoughts, anybody who hasn't gotten to speak a lot want to speak?
I'm not sure if. Can you hear me? I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is a theme or not, but what my favorite quote, I haven't finished the book yet, so thanks for the spoilers, but my favorite quote so far has been, and this is Wyo and the Prophet talking. Dear lady, I'll happily accept your rules, but you don't seem to want any rules. True. But I will accept any rules that you feel necessary for your freedom. I am free no matter what rules surround me. If I find them tolerable, I tolerate them. If I find them too obnoxious, I break them. I am free because I know that I alone am morally responsible for everything I do. So that's the theme, like every highlight that I have in the 12 or so chapters that I've read has been something similar to that. It's like, I'm in charge. It's my life, my body, my choice, whatever, you know? So, I don't know. That was.
Oh, I agree, Cheeky. It's at least for Prof, that's a theme all the way through the book. Everything he does, even things he finds distasteful, he takes responsibility for what he does.
Yep.
His point is never that somebody forced him to do something. Everything he did, he does of his own will, and he's responsible for. So.
I think that's a perfect point to end on, because I love that theme. I think it's great. Yeah, Carrie, anything you want to say before we head out?
No, I just wanted to give one more opportunity for any final thoughts from folks. I feel like I talked a lot.
Anything
Okay. I really enjoyed having so many people here today. And this was a great book, Carter. I appreciate you picking it. We are going to be doing, the next book is going to be nonfiction. We're doing Cynical Theories by James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose. And I'm excited about this one too, because I know a lot of people had already bought it and we're going to read it anyway. So this is good timing. And we're doing it in January something. We'll put it on.
Hold on, I'll look. Let me see if I can find it.
It'll be on the book club page. Yeah. You can find it on the book club page. Carter will put it
here.
Up
I'll
there.
go into.
Okay.
I'll go in and look, and I'll see where it is. Okay, I'll give you an answer right now. It is on January
24th. Zach and Matt.
Noon. Yep.
Yeah. So we'll see you there. And if you guys have book suggestions, you can always drop them to us in the chat or in the comments. Or what's a final thought somebody's had?
Now this is off topic. It's not about the book. But I had a hard time actually finding the link to get to the email to let you know I wanted to participate. It's not on the book club page. I finally found it on your Facebook page.
Oh, Harry, thank you. You mean to figure out how to email us to get it and everything?
Right.
Okay. So, yeah, we'll make that more clear. Like, if anybody's watching this, we are live. If anybody's watching this and you want to participate in the next one, the way that you get the link is by emailing us at speak@unsafespace.com. And then Carter puts those links together very close to the date and sends them out.
Actually, you know what? Kudos to Beverly this time, because
Beverly
she did it for me this time. Yes.
Cool. Thanks, Beverly.
Yeah. So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a good weekend. We will see you on Monday for Coffee Break. Later. Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. For your protection, the following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and marked for cancellation. Any association with these individuals will be considered an act of willful sedition. Here's a fun fact: Santa Claus may be a myth, but the Federal Reserve is real. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Did you know that medical experimentation on humans can be justified using Hegelian ethics? Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.